Alrighty, welcome to the Carbon Series podcast. I am here with Gavin Dillingham. He is the director of Clean Energy Policy at the Houston Advanced Research Center in Houston, Texas. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
And so this series is a lead-in to the Carbon Summit we are planning for this summer. And as a guy from North Dakota who used to work for a very large Texas oil and gas company, it's very intriguing to see. And I want to extend some condolences and some empathy towards what you guys are going through down there. It seems like there's a lot going on, and hopefully you can fill us in on some of that as it relates to kind of your work. So what is going on with the Houston, Texas blackouts right now?
Right. So yeah, last week was quite eye-opening experience for a lot of us. Was not really anticipated or expected. We get relatively cold winters in Houston, but typically nothing in the freezing range, and usually kind of in the 40s or so. So when you start talking about temperatures in the teens and actually down in the single digits up in the Woodlands, which is north of Houston from us, it starts getting very, very cold, and we start realizing, kind of the frailty of our infrastructure to deal with some of that. So what we saw happen was we had a lot of systems that were already offline for maintenance. And so kind of starting in the shoulder months before the summer cooling season starts, a lot of the thermoelectric power plants come down for maintenance purposes because typically we don't have a heavy load at this time of year. And so that kind of got us a little kind of in a hole there to some degree as far as having enough power generation coming up. Also, the kind of the wind power that typically is out there, usually in the winter, it comes down a little bit, so you don't have as much wind capacity as we have in the summer. And then we just had really high demand rates. So usually the demand is in the 50,000 megawatt, 50 gigawatt frame there. We were up at around 74 gigawatts demand. And so that's more like summer like peak demand numbers than typically winter demand. And so the system just really was not prepared for that. As I said, we had a lot of stuff down for maintenance, and then just did not have a lot of the capacity available. The other issue that we faced was the oil and gas infrastructure, especially the natural gas infrastructure, was just not winterized appropriately. And so we had issues with actually getting natural gas to the system, to our natural gas plants. And so even if, even if we had the systems available, the generators available, we may not even be able to get natural gas to them. So it's kind of a systemic kind of issue that we faced, delivering fuel to these sites, as well as just having some of these sites down and just not being ready for such a large demand spike. The coal-fired power plants froze up a little bit on us because of not being winterized appropriately. We lost one of our nuclear power stations due to a frozen sensor issue. And so it's just kind of a bunch of issues kind of coming together right there and really causing a significant problem for the state, leading to the blackouts that started happening on Monday. Those were forced to happen. We went into kind of the highest level of kind of area in which we started to have to start doing rolling blackouts, or the grid would essentially fail. So ERCOT, which is our independent system operator, started calling for rolling blackouts. Those lasted a lot longer than they anticipated. And so we ended up with a lot of people out of power for several hours, in some cases 36 hours or so, and really caused some kind of heartaches for a lot of folks there. One of the other outcomes of this is that just the homes here in Houston are largely built and developed for heating, or for the heat for summer temperatures, not necessarily insulated to deal with very cold temperatures. So we ended up with a significant amount of water pipes that busted within homes. Some people are seeing times potentially out to early March before they get the water back on, just due to a need for plumbers, or just not enough supply of plumbers out there to get things fixed there. So kind of this big.
So it's kind of a perfect storm of things, that unfortunately it happened. And there's a lot of talk, especially on LinkedIn and social platforms, of trying to blame somebody. I've seen from oil and gas, their constituents and their stakeholders are saying it was renewable energy problems, and on the other side it was, it's oil and gas problems. And it really kind of came down to the market circumstances of the power generation, to where Texas is very unique in the sense that you guys have a deregulated market. And so what implications does that mean? I don't think there's necessarily any industry to blame, when it comes to what happened. It's just maybe a lack of resiliency planning or, climate change. And I think it's probably safe to say now that we are moving into having to plan for climate change, extreme weather instances like this regularly.
Right. Oh, yes, absolutely. And it really, yeah, when you look across all the different systems that were out there performing, when we've seen the most recent numbers, solar was the only generation resource that actually outperformed. I think it was expected to be about 1 gigawatt, and it actually ended up being closer to 3 gigawatts being provided to the system. Most of the wind, from what we're hearing, about half of the wind was down just due to icing and blades freezing up. Those that maintained operation, especially those along the Gulf Coast and Corpus Christi, actually outperformed and actually made up for some of that loss that was happening out in West Texas. And then largely the natural gas plants provided the majority of the power as expected, but most of that load, I think it was close to 30 gigawatts of that was down at one point. And so it was an overall systemic kind of failure there. We can look back and kind of think about what could have been done. And there was a report that came out after the most recent freeze, which was in 2011, where there was a major winter storm, where FERC came out and NERC came out with some recommendations and suggestions of how the state needs to really focus, especially on its natural gas infrastructure, to winterize that, so it does not have these kind of freeze ups, as well as winterize its natural gas plants. From what we can tell, none of those recommendations were taken. The Public Utility Commission did not push those out to require that to occur. And the primary reason for that is just kind of the market that we're in here. ERCOT buys the power at the lowest price. And so if you do any type of these upgrades, or do any of this kind of effort to make sure your system is more resilient, that puts you potentially at a price, at an issue where you're not going to be able to compete as well on price. And so you may not get that power taken from ERCOT and sold. And so so that provides no incentive for really any additional kind of resilience or any additional kind of upgrades to these facilities, whether it's wind or whether it's thermal electric plants, coal, natural gas, nuclear. There's no really incentive to do that, because you want to have the lowest price power come out of there. There's plenty of ways in which we could winterize these facilities, and some of the questions are around that, as far as building and enclosing the natural gas plants, adding heaters to the wellheads, and kind of ensuring that the natural gas continues to flow there. Adding heaters, or working to there's different type of paint applications that potentially can go on blades in order to help de-ice those. But once again, all of that adds additional cost, and it just does not work in a market that's focused solely on the lowest price. And that's kind of why we are in the situation we're at.
And is that one of the term is race to the bottom, like to where when you're looking at providing the lowest price possible, and that's what ERCOT is buying, like you said, there's no incentive structure there. And then these electricity providers, they're actually incentivized to cut as many costs as they can. So yeah, like those value added, capacity building, resiliency kind of focused infrastructure build outs, it just doesn't make sense to them, to where if you add those costs, you can't pass those on to the consumer, because ERCOT is going to bypass you and go get cheaper power somewhere else.
Right. So that's not stuff you can go in and rate case, or do a rate case on and pass that on to the customers there, because that's just not how the market is established. In more regulated markets, you can. If you're a generator and you want to do these upgrades, you do a rate case, you do the upgrades, you pass it on to the customer. In this case, you're not allowed to do that. The expectation is that if these market prices go up high enough, and in this case, it was at $9,000 a megawatt for about 4 days or so, that would be the incentive in order to get people, the generators, to take the steps they need. That hasn't panned out yet. We haven't seen that happen in the summer peak months, whenever this was, when this was really, when the market was really designed to perform, with those market caps at $9,000. That hasn't happened in the summer. This is kind of the first time it's really happened in the winter with this with the current market cap. We don't anticipate that really driving a whole lot of, voluntary efforts or to winterize any of these plants. What we anticipate is that there's probably going to have to be some sort of resilient standard placed, or some sort of adoption of NERC standards by the Public Utility Commission, enforced by the Public Utility Commission, to get some of these changes to happen. How do the generators get compensated, or how are they able to kind of do this and still maintain competitiveness in the market? That's going to be a question that a lot of us are going to have to try to figure out. But there's going to have to be something that pushes this along.
I was going to say, so that the 2011 incident, or studies that came about that were pushed to the Public Utilities Commission, they did nothing about it. How do we, get them to do something about it? And from what I understand, there's, or just the things that I've been involved in, there's very high barriers of entry for organizations like, mine, or other, people that I know who are, clean tech focused, efficiency, resilience, sustainability, to where you have these small groups that, are longstanding, they're not innovation focused. And so they're really old school systems, that actually have to design and build out new systems. And so those fundamentally don't work together.
Yeah, it makes it very difficult to bring in a lot of innovation, at least on the resilience side of things. Any of the new kind of development that's happening in ERCOT right now, which is, there's a significant amount of it, none of it is merchant related power. Most of it is through power purchase agreements, and a lot of it's corporate driven or driven by cities, or even institutional investors looking to kind of green up their portfolio there. And so when you look beyond that type of activity that's happening in ERCOT, when you look at kind of opportunities on more focused on distributed energy resources, especially in the regulated market, to look at more grid flexible buildings, to look at the opportunity within the distribution grid to innovate and bring in new opportunities for load shedding and load shaping and energy efficiency. That's all it's not easy to do, largely because the price of electricity is so low in the state. But there just aren't any kind of incentives or opportunities such as net metering to kind of push more microgrid development or distributed energy development. And some of that has to do with, there just isn't a lot of transparency or visibility by ERCOT into what's in the distribution grid. And that makes it very difficult for them to be able to manage what's going on there. And there's been some efforts by the PUC and discussions by ERCOT to, some studies that are starting to be done to better understand how they can get better visibility into the distribution system. And if we can do that, it gives us a lot more flexibility and opportunities to start doing more proactive energy efficiency and grid flexibility kind of work, or building flexibility kind of work.
So one thing that comes to mind, being from North Dakota, Williston, in the heart of the Bakken, Texas has had a major influence over my community and the region for as long as I can remember. I mean, coming out of high school. And this incident or this situation that's come about is, I've always viewed Texas as one of the energy capitals of the world. And you guys just took a gut punch, like to where your systems have failed. And it's really disheartening, for people in the energy sector and even globally to be like, wow, you guys were supposed to be the leaders. Like, where has the leadership fell off in Texas, and how do we get that back? I mean, because honestly, Houston, you guys are, command center, for a lot of these energy policies. And if you guys can't get it right, who can?
Right. Well, I think to some degree, it's just kind of competitive markets gone too far. I mean, we're a big proponent of open markets and, the opportunity to kind of allow business to drive some of these decisions and kind of drive these, especially within energy. But to some degree, you're dealing with electricity and energy, especially on the electricity side. It's a public good to some degree, and I think we've deregulated too far in this degree, as far as where there just aren't any real standards or best practices put in place that are enforced in order to ensure that, the bare minimum, we maintain the electric power system here. And I think it's kind of deregulation gone amok to some degree. You need a balance between the two. It's great to be able to, yeah, it's great to have private enterprise working towards efficiencies, working towards providing a good product at a good price that's affordable and such. But if you go too far to where you start putting lives at risk and you start putting your whole economy and your communities at risk, it's too much of an overreach. And so there needs to be some degree of at least setting some standards and enforcing basic standards on reliability and resilience. The other thing that we're running into is that when you look at the energy planning that happens across the United States, and especially in Texas, is they do not take into account climate data. They do not take into account downscale climate data specifically. And when we talk with ERCOT and we talk with some of these utilities, they still use 20 years historical weather data and project it out another 20 years and assume that that's going to give them an idea of what to expect. We've been trying to get them to say, the climate models are becoming much more accurate. They're allowing you to start putting some probability distributions on some of these events. So why don't you at least start integrating that into your decision making to some degree, to where you're, essentially having better clarity and transparency of what scenarios you may be facing. And so, there's no way we can predict that this storm is going to happen at this time and at this place, but we can say the likelihood of more extreme heat events or droughts or hurricanes or flooding events are increasing, and the likelihood of them increasing by X over 5 to 10 year period. And so if you start taking that information into account and stop thinking that previous weather or historical weather is going to be the same as our future weather, you at least have a better idea of how you need to start planning things, and you have a little more opportunity to start taking some action there. And you can probably start valuing resilience into some of your operations to some degree, because that's one of the things we run into, as well as when people start looking at, well, okay, I want to build this new piece of infrastructure and I want it to be resilient, but I don't know how to value the resilience benefit into it. So that's one of the things we've been focusing on, is how do you value that real resilience benefit so it becomes part of your financial decision making and ultimately your final impacts or the final choice that you make there. And I think that's one of the limiting factor across a lot of infrastructure, is we don't take into account that long-term potential impact and don't take into account the resilience needs under different climate conditions. And that's what we need to start really focusing on, is taking that type of information and using it in their decision making.
Yeah, and one of the things from a cultural standpoint, Texans are very proud, right? And so me working with the oil and gas industry, and understanding that there needs to be a transition. You need to have a balance. We use a lot of oil and gas, but there's a lot of opportunities. Like when you said solar, was one of the best performance sources, during this blackout. That's a real positive thing to kind of, even under the circumstances, it doesn't seem like it, but it's a positive side note. But how, from a cultural standpoint, how does oil and gas in Texas view clean energy and the transition that is happening as we speak?
It really depends on which oil and gas company you're talking to. And so when you look at the global companies, the Shells, Total, Engie, those kind of European-based energy companies, especially Shell and BP most recently, they're very much focusing on becoming energy companies. And you see greater investment in electricity, see greater investment in renewables, battery storage, electric vehicles. And they seem to be really making that push more than just kind of how they've done it in the past, where they kind of take a look but really don't invest too much into it. You see those kind of global oil and gas companies really trying to transition to energy companies. It's not happening as quickly or as much within kind of the domestic large oil and gas companies. And that's one of the concerns that we have within Houston is, are we going to be willing to at least start taking some of those steps to that energy transition? Completely understanding that oil and gas is important. It's important pieces of the economy. There's very much some needs for that. within a lot of the materials that we use, the products that we buy, for energy, for transportation. But how do we start kind of diversifying that to some degree in a serious way? And what steps do we need to start taking? The other thing, to start looking at is how do we continue to use this natural gas, but in the most clean way possible? While we look at carbon capture, utilization, and storage, in some industries it works really well, especially along the Gulf Coast and the ship channel, where we have a lot of industry, a lot of refining, natural gas processing. Carbon capture utilization works really well there. You have a pure stream of CO2. You look at it out in the power sector, natural gas plants, for example, it's much more difficult and much more cost effective, or not cost prohibitive to do out there. But what we need to do, what the oil and gas needs to do, is if they want to continue to use natural gas and oil, they need to make sure that these methane emissions that are happening in the midstream, that are happening upstream at the wellhead, are mitigated and are lessened. And where they are burning the stuff, that there's some sort of carbon capture, utilization, and storage that's happening there. And it's not just the economics around it anymore. It's just kind of becoming a reputational issue. The license to operate, the license to have a company, is going to be key on, are you being good stewards? Most of the world is kind of like, yeah, it's time to start cutting these emissions. Do our domestic oil and gas companies hear that message, or do they just continue business as usual? And that's a big.
Well, Gavin, that's a great point to bring up, because the fact I did an event in West Texas in Odessa, an energy type of a festival, I guess you could say. And I also did one in Greeley, Colorado, and Williston, and they're still flaring like it's going out of style. And like, you have people that are that's the lowest hanging fruit. If you cannot solve the flaring issue, you've lost your trust, or your public trust. So fix that issue. And that's from my hometown, in the West Texas, and if you're in the industry, there's there's an assimilation that happens, like, to where you can't talk about those things, and you can't trust an industry that does that. So they need to really focus on bringing back that trust piece. And if they can't do it from within, bring in outside organizations, like to where you have Bitcoin mining, like you can use that power at the wellhead. You can tie into different systems. It may cost some money, and you may need to work with the states in order to increase that infrastructure, but you risk being shut down, because it's like, that is a very rooted, that's the low hanging fruit, you could say, of or the black eye in the industry. And so if they can't control their own emissions, and we're having natural gas shortages across the nation, and it's right. Embarrassing. And so that's like my big challenge, and the leadership is so encapsulated, they're so siloed, to where you have pockets of leadership. And especially, and now, a lot of this leadership is coming from these large multinationals, like BP, like you were saying, even Equinor, which they just sold most of their assets in the Bakken, because they realized it was going to be too costly to get it up to their standards. So they just unloaded it. And, that's not the right thing to do either. So it's a challenge. Let's just say it's a challenge. But from a cultural standpoint, oil and gas need leadership. That's really what I can see. And because clean energy, from a efficiency effectiveness standpoint, and you could probably speak to this a lot more, they're making, incremental gains year over year. But when you look at that from a 10-year standpoint, you're talking 20 to 50% increases in efficiency. Those are big, major gains.
Yeah. I mean, you're seeing significant improvements in the wind and solar technologies, especially around the efficiencies of those panels and just the equipment. The changes in pricing on storage, and the capacity of the new storage systems that are coming out, and you see it less as an infrastructure thing. I mean, it's still a significant infrastructure, but a lot of what you're seeing is improvements in technology, which is kind of different than what you see on the oil and gas side, where there's innovation and improvements happening, but not at the scale and at the speed that it's happening on the renewable side. And it really would be nice to kind of see that translation into oil and gas, so they can kind of make sure they're making those significant strides that need to happen, especially on carbon capture. Because we still see, when we look at what happened in ERCOT and what happened in Texas this last week, natural gas was still the key energy provider there, was still the key electricity resource. And it's likely to be, remain that for a while, but it's going to be much more difficult to maintain that if it does not take the steps that need to be done in order to mitigate the greenhouse gases and reduce their carbon footprint there. And that's where we're going to start running into some issues, especially in Texas, if we can't clean that piece up.
And that's another great point. And I think, even with the states that have much smaller oil and gas footprints, like North Dakota is a great testing ground for prototyping new ideas and innovations, especially with, with the flare gas, and, just integrating ESG and the decarbonization. I think when you combine those with regenerative agriculture, North Dakota is really positioned well for that. And so from your standpoint, a lot of people talk about, very, technical terms, very scientific terms. When we talk about decarbonization, integrating ESG and, things like EERS, what does that mean to the general consumer? And, like how are these companies going to be able to integrate these things? Like who's leading these rollouts, or is it just up to the company to figure it out?
Well, when you bring up EERS, that's a key piece. So that's the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, and there's just huge opportunity for energy efficiency across the entire United States. And
Definitely.
when you look at what happened in Texas, we got a very good idea of how inefficient our homes are, regardless if it's cold or hot. As I said, we build it for hot temperatures, but still they're horribly insulated, and for the most part, most of the building stock's not well insulated, and the building envelope's in pretty poor shape. And a lot of the mechanical equipment, the air conditioning, heating's not the newest stuff, because as I said earlier, electricity is really cheap, so there's really no incentive to upgrade that stuff, because you can have an old 10 SEER air conditioning and the electricity price isn't that high, versus if you upgrade it to a 16 or 20 or 21 SEER type air conditioning. And in any case, energy efficiency through the EERS can be a really key piece for the state of Texas. The state actually passed the first energy efficiency resource standard back in 1999. It was the first state in the country to do it, and was really a leader in that space. And then over the last 2 decades has just completely lost touch with that, and has the lowest EERS or energy efficiency goals in the country. And if we just edge that up just a little bit, the amount of funding that could be available to do energy efficiency, especially in low income and moderate income communities, would be tremendous. And you start talking about some significant improvements to people around energy burden, around kind of health and safety, public health, as well as when we start talking about power outages. As we put more into energy efficiency, you end up with homes that can kind of coast essentially. So when the power does go out, there's this passive survivability component that goes in there, where people can shelter in place and stay within their house and not worry about freezing to death or worry about heat exhaustion, because their home is well insulated and the building envelope's in good shape. And maybe they're even able to have some sort of solar plus storage type asset placed there. And that's some of the stuff we're actually working with Department of Energy right now, is solar plus storage in low income communities, and how do you deploy that to these communities to help them become more resilient, as well as kind of lessen that green divide. And so a lot of kind of what needs to happen, at least in the state of Texas, is, there's a really strong, kind of ecosystem around energy efficiency. There's plenty of good programs that are good companies that are doing this work. It's just really difficult to make this stuff pencil out. And so finding more innovative funding models to do this, and some of it, especially in the commercial space, is doing more third-party ownership or energy service agreements or leasing or hosting arrangements. Those have all been becoming more popular in the state, because they just kind of shift that cost from a capital expense to an operational cost. But on the residential side, it's still very difficult to do, if you want to get new windows, or if you want to do insulation, or if you want to do a new air conditioning system, it's very difficult unless especially if you're low to middle income, to do that kind of stuff. And so we need more efforts around utility programs that can provide the service to the community there. And so I think that's going to be one of the key areas as we move forward, is just reducing demand. You don't need to worry so much about outages and the amount of generation capacity if you can just reduce demand. And we just really need to kind of focus on that as a key area. And that's really a low-hanging fruit for much of the state.
Yeah, I feel like we, as a society, we generate plenty of power, enough power to, fuel kind of everything for the most part. When it comes to, calculating the costs of the weather, like I guess 2020 was known as a extreme weather event year, and with costs over $1 billion in damages here in the U.S. and the NOAA, the Oceanic.
NOAA.
NOAA. They've been recording these weather events since 1980, and we're up to $1.875 trillion in costs. And so, when do we start accounting for these externality and these costs, to justify the spending with government organizations like the Department of Energy or USDA and these organizations that do focus on rural development and kind of community development.
Right. That's a great question, and something we're trying to figure out is what's going to motivate action there. So there were 22 $1 billion events, that 22 events that cost $1 billion or more last year, according to NOAA, as you were mentioning. 11 of those happened in the state of Texas. And it's like, okay, we're starting to see a trend here of these events happening over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Why can't we start doing something to mitigate this? And in some cases, a lot of those events that have hit Houston in the last few years have been more hurricane and flooding related. And there's starting to be some action in that regard, but it's just, there just isn't as much or as much action as you think would be happening if you see these kind of events continuing to occur over and over again. And a lot of that seems to be almost a lack of leadership to some degree. And some of that's driven by, we're Texas and we do things by ourselves, and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And so, it's kind of this individualism gone overboard to some degree, to where there isn't that investment happening within the community and within our infrastructure, because it's up to you to figure it out, not up to the community to work together and the community to figure things out and to work with your public works department and giving them the power and the ability and opportunity to build out this infrastructure. And so it's kind of that to some degree, that it's great to kind of be able to be have your own to be that individual, to be successful, to go out and make a good life for yourself and such. But it gets to a point to where there's a community that has to be there. There's an infrastructure that needs to be in place, and you're going to need that support to do it going forward. It seems like we've almost lost that in the state, because it's just so much focus on, what can I do? What can how do I need to operate and such? And so, I think that's kind of putting us into a little bit of a bind, that just kind of loss of the need for government to be there to some degree, just to help maintain basic infrastructure services. I mean,
definitely.
That's kind of where we are right now, is we just need basic infrastructure to work. And we kind of found out that the way leadership works here, it's not happening right now.
And it's like, from my standpoint, I know a lot of, I'm 33, I'm a millennial. I know a lot of my colleagues who are very intelligent. They understand, like I got electrical engineers that are building, power systems for cities at the local level, but they never get into government asking them what their advice is, or municipalities saying, oh, what do you think about this? And so they're building old systems, still. Right. And he's like, I don't know why, that's where the money's at. And so exactly. like where's the passing of the torch? Is that, do you think that's going to happen with these boomers and these older generations, who are used to doing things their way, or does it have to be taken from them?
I think it's interesting. That's an interesting question, because the millennial generation and younger generations are becoming more and more fed up with this. And you're trying to see, like, it's time for us to get in government. It's time for us to get more involved. And you're seeing that influx of greater involvement and participation. And I think that's what's going to have to drive a lot of this. Is just, it's like, okay, you guys have had your chance.
Yeah, when's enough? And yeah, it's like I try to stay very positive and optimistic and just really focus on opportunities. but when I see, very capable, very smart, knowledgeable people, very technical people that, are very frustrated, that they don't have an opportunity to get involved and to work on these challenges. That's when that the system it's a systemic failure. And I can see the governments, they're really, they understand that there is a failure there, but they don't know how to fix it. And they're not inviting anybody to the table, to outside of their groups. And we're really, even from a government standpoint, very cliquey, and that's not how we're going to get, when you talk about interdependence or, or collaboration, equity, inclusion, it's like, who are they talking to? Like when they're talking about these things,
Right.
so like those, there's a lot of political correctness that, I think we got to get past somehow. Like I'm okay to be offended if it's the truth, and so that's where Texas, I think you guys have an awesome opportunity to rebuild and, to really kind of fix that culture. But is it going to happen? I guess it's from a short historical context, it doesn't look like it. Like that's from the outside looking in, because like when is enough enough, I guess is a question.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'm hoping in these last few events that have happened, this most recent winter storm, the Hurricane Harvey, the flooding that we've seen, that it starts driving for at least more pushing by the community that we need to work on the actual overall system and the infrastructure within the system and make sure that we have something that physically operates. It can't all be privatized. There just isn't that. You end up what we have in our energy system right now, where everything's just focused on the lowest cost to provide lowest cost, which is great. It's great when it's blue sky days and everything's working great. But whenever something happens like this, you kind of see how frail that type of approach is. And I'm not asking or calling for a complete market restructuring or redoing of what's happened there, because it's provided some great benefit. We have some of the largest renewable energy development in the country because of how this market's been set up.
Yeah.
But there needs to be at least some standards put in place and some requirements to ensure just basic operations need to happen and that basic infrastructure needs to continue to operate. And that's going to require, I think, new people coming in and kind of saying, this is what we need to do. It's about coming in and voting new people into office that have more of these, have these ideas of, this is how we go out and fix infrastructure as a community, as a state, that this is how we need to kind of work in order to ensure that our communities are safe, that our economy is strong, that we have plenty of these resources available and that are operating to where we can start attracting business. I mean, that's one of the things that drive people to Texas is low energy cost and lack of deregulation, but you can only go so low on your energy costs, and some of this deregulation stuff and lack of standards is starting to kind of show up a little bit to where businesses are like, I don't know if I need to be disrupted, a month out of the year because of flooding, or I don't know if I need to be disrupted a month out of the year because of this power outage or this infrastructure failure. So you get to that point of, you've got to start having something basic. And I think a lot of that is going to be based on voting new people into office and getting people that have that kind of sensibility of how government's supposed to work back into office.
Well, and I think people are willing to pay for, infrastructure that has better capacity, better resilience. It's really has an ESG component kind of designed built into it. And so I don't think that is a big issue. But who's going to raise those standards? The governor? Is it the Public Utility Commission of Texas? Who is ultimately responsible for raising those standards or setting those standards?
Well, the Public Utility Commission is, but you need different potentially new commissioners in there, and that requires that you have a new governor and a new legislature in there to kind of push that type of stuff. And who's to see? We have an upcoming governor's election. We'll see, who kind of comes out and runs, and you'll see how people vote. How serious are people for change in Texas? How fed up are they with, kind of these infrastructure issues we've been having, and are they willing to kind of, make that change and vote for something different? And I think that's where a lot of it's going to have to happen. It's going to be voters coming in and kind of choosing new leadership, and it's going to be businesses, voting with their feet. Are they going to stay in Texas and continue to operate here? We've had some good successes recently with, some mentions of some of these companies coming into Texas. Are they willing to stay if they can't keep the power on? And if they, and that was one of the concerns after Hurricane Harvey is how many times does the city of Houston need to start flooding before people are like, I'm done with this. I can't, live like this on a regular basis. And that was some of the conversations we had with the oil and gas companies. They're like, we got to get the city and the state to start doing something to reduce this flood risk, because otherwise we're not going to be able to, hire and retain, high quality people that we need for these businesses and such.
Well, there's
so, when does that start happening? So
yeah, there's a generational gap. Like I got at oil and gas, and I'm in the 30s, and I got a lot of my friends who actually started companies and were very successful. They're getting out because they're culturally burnt out of the pace and of the hierarchy and the way the business is done. So from the oil and gas standpoint, that system culturally needs a reimagination or a makeover. But with HARC and what you guys are doing, like what are some of the positive things that are happening in Texas or in Houston, as it pertains to water and air and clean energy?
Right. There's, some really exciting things happen that we're working on the solar plus storage side of things, reducing that green energy divide for low income communities. I think that's going to be very important, not only to kind of allow people to fully participate and have an opportunity to, buy and purchase and be a part of this renewable energy, but also providing resilience through the storage component. So we see both the mitigation of greenhouse gases, the reduction, as well as the adaptation piece being a key component there. So that's exciting to see that moving forward. We're seeing some innovation happening on the financing side and the funding for energy efficiency and clean energy that's really kind of driving the market forward there. On the air quality side, there's actually been some significant improvements in air quality in Houston over the last, couple decades or so. We're no longer competing with LA for the, worst ozone air or air quality in the country. So, there's been some major improvements in that regard. We're seeing a lot kind of on the infrastructure side. We're seeing a lot more interest in green infrastructure, especially after the flooding efforts. So how do we get more of this kind of nature-based green infrastructure implemented? There's been some good policy changes and ordinances at the city of Houston level. They're really promoting that, as well as just kind of actually doing a little more planning related to increasing densification within the city, allowing for more walkable communities, more transit-oriented development happening. So you're seeing that starting to happen, and a lot of that goes to what we were talking about earlier, is you just have new people moving in here that are especially younger folks that just want to have a certain way in which they want to live, and they have certain preferences, and they're starting to, and that's what they're demanding, and that's what the city's starting to try and provide them there and such. And so yeah, there's some good stuff, some very wonderful things happening across the state. We still have huge amount of solar and wind growth happening. The amount of capacity that's coming online of solar right now is just, it's off the charts. So it's very exciting to see that happening. We're seeing some great opportunities around the storage side of things. The Public Utility Commission is making some decisions around that right now. Hopefully they'll be in the favor to allow us to deploy greater amounts of storage, but we're really talking about that. And so there's a lot of great opportunities in just kind of the green transition happening in general. Some of those larger oil and gas companies, the global oil and gas companies that we talked about earlier, Shell and BP and Equinor, they're really trying to invest in the city of Houston, particularly. BP gave about $5 million to the city of Houston on its climate action plan. Shell has donated a lot of funding and human resources to the resilience planning for Houston. So you have a lot of greater investment from these communities, focused specifically on climate and on kind of quality of life issues that we had not had in the past. Even the Greater Houston Partnership, which has a tendency not to talk about climate and such, has even jumped in there and has really been pushing that and advocating for more discussions around resilience and greenhouse gas mitigation and such. So the city of Houston has its first climate action plan. We helped the city write that the last couple of years or so, and they launched it Earth Day of 2020. It has a lot of great strategies and opportunities, and a lot of them are market and incentive focused. So really trying to push that initiatives along there. So there's some good things happening.
Yeah, I seen I was going to actually ask you about that city of Houston. That's on your website. So if people wanted to go and learn more about what you guys do at HARC, where would they go, and what would be the best way to engage?
To learn more about HARC?
Yeah, learn more about your organization and what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. We're pretty active on social media. But I mean, the greatest place is just go to our website, harpresearch.org, www.harpresearch.org. It really does a nice job of kind of laying out all the research areas we work in, all the programmatic pieces we work on. As I mentioned, we work on air quality, we work on water quality, water supply, ecosystem services, flood management mitigation, energy water nexus, and of course the energy stuff we've been talking about. Most of that's focused on kind of both energy efficiency as well as improving energy resilience. And so that's a great resource there to look at. We have a website out there called pythiasanalytics.com, which is kind of a spin-off we've been playing with that's more focused on climate risk analytics. And that's a great resource of people, especially in the energy industry, is interested in kind of how do we start developing the appropriate scenarios and plausible scenarios for risk, for climate risk to our power assets or power portfolio.
So they want you guys to make models about these climate risks and how they integrate them into their business operations.
Right. So we're able to run a variety of different scenarios. So you're a thermoelectric power plant out in West Texas, and you want to understand what your capacity factor looks like or what your value at risk looks like. And so we run the model looking at different extreme heat scenarios, different water temperature scenarios based on downscaled climate data, and allows them to kind of figure out, all right, so this is what looks like is coming down the road. Here are my different options I can take in order to kind of mitigate that risk. Do I invest in maybe a hybrid plant? Do I divest? Do I do nothing? What's the value for me to do different options?
And where do you see, I guess we can end with, where do you see the biggest opportunity and where do you see the biggest challenge in the clean energy transition?
I think the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity is within the distributed energy. So we talked a lot about transmission scale, utility scale, solar, wind, geothermal, or not geothermal, thermoelectric power plants. But I think the greatest opportunity is when you start looking at microgrids, and you start looking at solar plus storage, and you start looking at the development of virtual power plants, and how these systems can start really interacting at more at a distributed level versus at a transmission level. And if we can get it down to that, you're talking about potentially greater resilience, the ability to provide more local power to sites and not be reliant on these much more widely dispersed systems that could potentially, fail due to, ice storms or major windstorms or tornadoes or freezes or whatever. You have more localized power. Plus, with a better designed distributed grid with these distributed energy resources, you couple that with grid flexible buildings that are able to do demand shedding, demand shaping. You end up with some really great dynamic opportunities there, where you end up with a much more efficient, resilient type operation in buildings. So we're really excited about kind of that microgrid deployment, grid flexible buildings. Virtual power plants seem to be kind of a fun area to really be focusing on.
That's very interesting. When you say virtual power plants, can you describe that to the audience?
Sure. So when we talk virtual power plants, essentially you have within the state, I'm not going to go too technical. So you have a utility, and they have a variety of different customers that are out there, and all of them have, say, storage or solar and storage on their building. What you can do is you aggregate all that. You have visibility into each one of those buildings, and you can aggregate that load and say, okay, this is actually a power plant. I have 20 megawatts of generation happening at each one of these, when I aggregate all these sites together. So I can then say, I want to use X percentage of that and I want to send it back to the grid and send it to other places. Or I
Mm.
want to take all that off the grid and I want to just have them provide power directly to themselves. So you're essentially creating the power plant out of an aggregate set of distributed resources there that you can control, whether they dispatch power to the grid or whether they keep it on site.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't seen that model like working yet. And
well, that's the innovation that needs to happen. They've been trying a little bit up in Con Edison, up in New York, actually with Bitcoin, but a lot of it has to do with improving our smart meter technology, improving our distribution system to have that transparency in there. And there's going to be some regulatory work that has to happen to make it all plausible. But when you start looking at your ability to generate and use these buildings more flexibly, you end up with potentially a more robust and resilient system.
So let's end on this. Since you said Bitcoin, let's end on cryptocurrency, because I got some friends who they're big into it and they are making things happen. Let's say that. So what do you see is the opportunity for Bitcoin and crypto to, enter the energy space and, be a resource?
Right. We looked at this a couple of years ago, and so I'm not as caught up as I was a couple of years ago on this, but we looked at it for the development of these virtual power plants, for one, and also just for energy settlements, because they're just potentially more more secure than a typical settlement process that's used. So kind of those back office settlements, as well as the virtual power plant type exchange of power. So I can, and it allows for peer-to-peer exchanges of power using Bitcoin there, but there's still some kind of regulatory constraints on that, the ability to do that. But on a different note, not necessarily using Bitcoin for energy transactions, but using energy to mine Bitcoin.
Yep.
We actually worked on a project with a wind turbine company. That was actually, well, it's a Bitcoin company that partnered with a wind turbine company. And what these wind turbines have to do, especially out in West Texas, is they have to curtail a portion of the time, just because there's just so much wind power that's being developed. You just can't put all that out onto the grid. And so they curtail a bit. When you curtail, you don't have necessarily any revenue coming in. So what wind farmers are looking to do is, how do we find other ways in which to generate revenue? And so what this Bitcoin company decided to do is they built this large 40-foot storage trailer filled with Bitcoin servers. And they took it out to this wind farm and essentially put it out there. And when the wind farm was curtailing, that they would instead send the wind power or the electric power into these Bitcoin miners, and they start mining for like a penny or 2 cents a kilowatt hour. So very, very low cost of power there. And whenever the wind power goes back up and gets dispatched into the grid, they come off. But since these miners are distributed, just kind of shoots the mining to somewhere else. And so there was one way in which to kind of help both Bitcoiners do the mining at a lower energy cost, and allowed wind farmers to get a bit more additional revenue. The other piece of that we were actually looking at is the temperature that comes out of these miners is about 150 degrees. And so there's actually some direct air capture, carbon direct air capture technologies that are becoming available, where if you get the temperature up just a bit higher, you can actually start absorbing CO2 into these membranes, these direct air capture membranes, and then capture it and then adsorb it, send it and put it into a truck and ship it off for like carbon capture and storage type process there. So it was actually doing a variety of things. It was doing the Bitcoining piece. It was helping on the curtailment of wind. It was also doing direct air capture of CO2. It's kind of a fun project there. So
that definitely sounds like it. I've encountered a few Bitcoin companies that are working on flaring solutions, but their challenge is access and a lack of incentive, from the operator to do something about their flaring. So I think that goes back to the Texas Railroad Commission, and I'm actually connected with a few of those guys, but it's hard to get to talk to them. It really is.
It is.
But thank you so much, Gavin, the Director of Clean Energy Policy at the HARC. I always want to say HARC Institute, but it's actually the Houston Advanced Research Center. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing, your wisdom, and I'm looking forward for Texas to make a a Texas-sized comeback.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I have no doubts that things will come together. I'm hopeful it's sooner than later. That's what my optimism is saying, that this event's going to shake up a lot of people, and there's going to be some more people get involved, and I think opportunities are they're coming. And I think that's usually a result of something like this, gets a lot of people talking about root causes, and a lot of analysis being done, and so there's some people fired up. So I think good things will happen as a result of this.
I think you're right. I feel pretty optimistic about what lies ahead. So I appreciate the opportunity to come talk about this today. So thanks, Jason.
Yeah, Gavin, I look forward to, there's actually an event in Houston. I think it's at the end of the year or the spring next year. And so I might be down there. Maybe we can meet up and grab a coffee or something when I get down there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd happy to do that. It'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And we are signing off of the Carbon Series podcast. You take care.